The question on every broke makeup lover's mind. How much of a difference is there between high-end eyeshadow palettes and drugstore eyeshadow palettes? Well, I was fortunate enough to receive 2 high-end eyeshadow palettes as gifts from my loved ones, which allows me to compare them to my drugstore palette, which I also received as a gift. Hopefully in this video I will be able to enlighten you on the differences between them or lack thereof. Now before I get started, I should say that I love these palettes equally, I use them often, and they work wonderfully. But let's break down the differences. Alrighty, so we know that these are more expensive than this, but because these are gifts, I want to be courteous and sensitive to that fact, so I'm not going to go into pricing. Packaging first. These high-end palettes are physically heavier than the drugstore ones. Now, I do only have one eyeshadow palette from drugstore, but I have looked at other brands other than L'Oreal's. I've looked at the Revlon one and the Maybelline one. So I can definitely say that the build of these is heavier. So I feel as if the packaging has more thought behind the design. You'll definitely see a lot of creativity from high-end brands in terms of them taking the time to name each individual eyeshadow, the art of the box and the container, and just creating a solid theme throughout the whole palette. It's marvelous. I think that's why there's such a huge draw to them, is because they are so creative and appealing. Whereas with your drugstore eyeshadow palettes, they're just going to be focusing on the basics, and most of the time, I think generally they don't come with boxes. The layout of these show you how to properly coordinate the colors, or at least hint at how to. So you can see with the chocolate bar there's about 3 pentagon shapes, and then you can break that down into trios. So these 3 go together, these 3 go together, and so forth and so on. There's also a noticeable gradient between light neutral shades and the darker shades, whereas the drugstore makeup seems to be a bit more sporadic in terms of their placement. The high-end even goes to the extent of giving you nice paper directions and ideas of how to do different eye makeup looks. So with the Urban Decay, you can learn how to do the Smoky Cat or the Everyday Smoky. Whereas drugstore, if they have any sort of direction, it's going to be on the back. So just a spiffy extra. Now there is a lot more mirror involved with the high-end palettes, whereas with the drugstore, if you get one at all, it tends to be a smaller, cheaper feeling mirror. Now that doesn't bother me too much because I personally don't really use those mirrors. I use a handheld one, but if you are concerned about that, yes, the mirrors are higher quality in the high-end palettes. There can be more eyeshadows involved in high-end palettes. I think the average for drugstore ones are about 10 to 12, whereas in the Urban Decay and the chocolate bar, it's about 12 to 15 colors. A wide variety of choices with differences in between each one. Now, probably the most important point here is there a difference in quality in the eyeshadows? There is. I noticed that the high end tends to be richer, creamier, and longer lasting, but you know, I've found some eyeshadows that aren't palettes that are on par with high-end eyeshadows, if not equal. An example of that would be Maybelline's Eye Studio Quad. These eyeshadows are super creamy and insanely pigmented, far more so than the high-end eyeshadows. High-end offers more of a variety between matte shades and sparkly shades. My favorite from the Urban Decay palette is called High. It's this glossy, almost liquid-looking eyeshadow that I don't think I'd be able to find in a drugstore. I think the amount of eyeshadow is different. I feel like I got way more eyeshadow in the high-end palettes in comparison to the drugstore palettes. Unique perks in terms of ingredients is also a big difference I noticed. For example, the chocolate bar by Too Faced claims to be made with 100% natural cocoa powder, and the eyeshadows themselves smell like chocolate. Now I don't know how they did that, but you're definitely not going to find that in drugstore eyeshadows. So big difference there. If it comes with one, you get a way better brush in a high-end palette in comparison to a drugstore palette, which might not even have one. Then again, high-end might not even have one either. So I did get one in the Naked Smoky palette. It is a very high quality brush, whereas in the L'Oreal palette, it was a half brush, half sponge, but definitely lesser quality in comparison to Urban Decay's brush that they give you. So my overall observation is, yes, there is a difference between a high-end eyeshadow palette and a drugstore palette. I feel like when you look at the detail of these, you can understand why they go for such a high price because of all the work that's put into them. But I think the high quality is more or less found in the design of the palettes rather than the eyeshadows themselves. I say that because I do notice inconsistency in the eyeshadows. Some of them are outstanding and I don't think you'd be able to find an equivalent at a drugstore. But on the other hand, there are some shades that are like, you know what, I bought a similar color the other week for $4. So that's my opinion, my breakdown of the differences. I hope this was helpful to you if you were looking at purchasing an expensive palette but you weren't sure yet if you should do so. I hope this helped and cleared up your questions. If you have any more questions, let me know in the comments below and I will answer them as soon as possible to the best of my ability. Thank you for watching. Bye!